Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu. This morning, I'm really thrilled and excited to have with me as my guest, Buddy Arnheim, who's a general and founding partner of a new venture capital firm, Lobby Capital. Buddy, welcome to the program.
Richard, it's so nice to be here.
Now, Buddy, you are obviously one of my very few, maybe even my first repeat guests. And the last time I had you on, you were still a lawyer. So I want to kind of just start by just asking you, I mean, obviously very successful lawyer. You had an incredibly successful practice. I interviewed you tremendously about that. What made you decide to leave, what would arguably be the height of your career to do this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm not entirely sure. And I say that a little tongue in cheek. The best decisions in my life, if I look back, have been made somewhat subconsciously. I asked my wife to marry me. I don't think I gave it much premeditation, and that turned out to be one of my best decisions of all time. We decided to have kids. I don't think we gave it much premeditation, and they've been a total joy. And I loved being a lawyer. I really look back over the almost 30 years that I practiced, and I truly loved that career. It was always challenging. It was at times incredibly fulfilling. The relationships that I built, the intimacy with my clients that developed, all of it was just incredibly rewarding. But if I take an honest look back, I would say that towards the end of along the path of my legal career, I was fortunate to kind of have some other extracurriculars. One was I had started angel investing, after I had first formed and opened the offices for Perkins Coie in the Bay Area, because I was seeing so many deals and so many sort of early stage companies, and I was getting excited about them, and I wanted to take advantage of that. And so I had become a very active investor off my own balance sheet, and then I had raised a couple of sort of sole GP funds. And then I had also started a couple of companies, one of which was this company, Titan Aerospace, which I call myself an inadvertent co-founder. I ended up co-founding this wacky startup where we were going to make atmospheric satellites. So, high altitude, autonomous flying drones that would generate electricity through solar panels during the day and use that electricity at night to stay aloft, and provide communication services and imaging services. And so that, so I had the practice of law, I had this investing, I had a couple of startups that I helped sort of nurture and grow. Titan ended up being acquired by Google. And I just found myself over the last 5 years of my practice, still practicing very hard, but spending an increasing amount of time on these other businesses and these other things and enjoying that. And I think that, and I think part of that was while I love being a lawyer, I was getting it was getting a little monotonous with the same, yet another venture financing, yet another IPO, yet another M&A transaction. And so to fuel myself, I realized I was doing these other things. And some of my investments, I got very lucky, and I think they became fairly visible to the investment community that I worked with. And so all of a sudden I found myself with an opportunity to join this fund or that fund and become a full-time investor. And it's funny, I didn't know really who to ask, because I couldn't talk to my legal colleagues. Hey, I'm thinking of leaving the firm. And, at that point I was the chair of the emerging company practice, and I had a lot of mouths to feed. And so, I reached out to David Hornick, who is a very close friend, and he was a colleague of mine at Perkins many years ago. And then he became a very successful venture capitalist. And when we were talking, it became the opportunity to join him instead became an opportunity, became a possibility. And so we started talking through that. And ultimately, as I really thought about becoming a full-time investor, I liked the idea of the job itself, But having been in partnerships my whole career, it was very important that it was the right partnership, and it couldn't be a better person to partner with than David and Eric as well, my other partner. So I think it was just one of these things where, I had practiced for a long time. I was very happy in it, but I had these other extracurriculars that were consuming more of my attention and giving me more and more joy. And then the opportunity to join and do that full time with the right people, surfaced. And I said, yeah, why not? I guess the other thing is, I always wanted to leave on top. I look at professional athletes that left at the top of their career, and I always admired them for the courage of sort of leaving behind more than they can take with them. And I also am a firm believer that, the fountain of youth, to the extent there is one, is keeping your brain challenged and making sure you never stop growing. And so the idea of being able to switch careers at the ripe old age of whatever it was, 53, 52, seemed to me like a good thing to do, a good thing to sort of, a good new challenge to put in front of myself.
Well, first of all, I know David Hornick also very well from Venture Law Group. I agree. You couldn't have picked a better colleague, a better partner. So, totally agree with that. He's been on my podcast. So you've been there now a little over a year. So tell me, what is it like and how is it different? Is it what you expected? I mean, I know you've obviously been a founder and invested in a lot of companies, but it's got to still be different when it's your full-time job. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it is. There's some wonderful, well, first of all, it's been about a year and a half. We during that time, we closed our first fund, which is a $250 million kind of early stage venture fund, very, very traditional, very kind of mainstream. And we've placed, I think the count right now is about 12 bets. We may not have closed a couple of them yet. They're in the process of closing, but 12 portfolio companies so far in that pool. Of course, we have, there's a portfolio of companies in the August Capital, under the August Capital umbrella that I'm helping David and Eric and Howard Hartenbaum manage. So there's a bunch of companies there that we're overseeing. And then again, new investments are coming out of Lobby Capital. We've made 12. It's a heck of a job. I can't say the hours are less. They are hours though that I have to proactively fill. As a lawyer, people are constantly calling you and grabbing your time. So it's really easy to fill up the day. And as a venture capitalist, everybody still a lot of people are calling and asking for your time, but you don't have to give it. And you actually are, you really need to prioritize how you allocate your time. So that takes a little bit more sort of proactive look forward. What am I doing? What am I trying to accomplish than it did as a lawyer, believe it or not. So that's sort of a tactical difference. But it is such a fun job. I mean, every day I will sort of be introduced to an entrepreneur, or I'll hear from an entrepreneur. I'll get a cold call, and they will, if I'm willing to listen, share with me how they think they're going to change the world. And I can listen to those people. They tend to be, almost all of them are brilliant. Almost all of them have this fire, this passion that's just amazing to listen to and feel. And if it piques my interest after I hear about it for the first time, I get the privilege of digging in and digging in as deeply as I want. And if I end up really loving it, then I can propose an investment. And then, there's a little bit of a game where you decide if they have to decide if they want me. And, but that indulgence of sort of learning about all these new things and digging into those that are piquing my interest the most is just incredible. Like, what a privilege. But it's not fewer hours and it's not less work. It's just a little different. It's on my terms, and it's my curiosity. With that comes the responsibility, though, of both making sure that I'm being respectful of those entrepreneurs, because these people, whether I like their business or not, they're putting their heart and soul into it. And I think I said this last time we spoke. In my mind, there's no more courageous creature than the entrepreneur. I mean, these people put it all on the line, and they bet everything to sort of put their visions into motion. And so, at a bare minimum, I've got to be respectful of that, and that's important. But I would also say that there's the report card is a different report card, right? So as a lawyer, you assume a person's problems and you do your best to solve those problems, and you take them very, very seriously. And within a fairly short time, if you've done a good job, and you get feedback, and you get accolades if you dealt with it the right way. As a venture capitalist, you ultimately place a bet or two a year. I'm on my third deal right now. And I won't know if those are successful investments for a long time. I don't know if it's years, right? It may be 2 years, it may be 10 years. And so the feedback loop on whether I'm doing a good job is a challenging thing to get used to. I think for me, the way I've been helping soothe my angst on that is I look back at my prior investments, the investments that I made before I joined Lobby Capital full time. And several of them are doing phenomenally well. And so I feel like at least in the past, I've been able to distill out some good investments. So there's no reason I shouldn't be able to now. And what I will say, maybe the last point, I'm being a little long-winded here on your question, but there is something incredibly satisfying about the role I'm playing now with these companies. The first investment I made is in an amazing company called Hidden Level. And I talked to the CEO, I don't know, anywhere from maybe once every other day to 3 or 4 times a day. And they're always important conversations. And he and I have developed this amazing relationship. I almost view him as a family member at this point because our interests are so incredibly aligned. He has so many amazing strengths. I have a few that are different. And so we've been able to kind of, conjoin those skill sets. And time will tell if we're actually ultimately successful in making this a big business. But I love the role I'm playing. I mean, he is the quarterback, he is the captain, I'm the coach, I'm the board member. And so that's been a really fun role to play. I was worried when I moved over from the law that I wouldn't have the same level of intimacy with my companies as I did as a lawyer. That's not the case. It really, really becomes a deep relationship.
Now, how are you able to not play the lawyer? I mean, I guess I'm just wondering, that's such a secondary part of you. How do you not, just immediately want to take control of the term sheet and start, redlining it or start giving them advice on the liquidation preferences and just snap back into what you've obviously advised me. How do you not do that? How do you refrain from doing that?
Yeah, well, I have a couple of constraints. One is we have this amazing general counsel in Lobby Capital named Abby Hibbs. And she's so much better than I will ever be. So that's the first thing is she's got her territory, and knowing that she's so good at it keeps me away from tinkering. But the more serious, not that that's not serious, but maybe sort of another serious point is, as a lawyer, as a senior lawyer, I think I found my day-to-day tasks to be more akin to what I am doing now than what I did as a younger lawyer. In other words, my job as a lawyer in the last many years was more consultative. At times I would tell my kids when they would ask me what I was doing that I was a psychologist, because I would be on the phone and I'd be talking through challenges more than actually processing the transactions. That was for my team. And sure, I had to oversee it, and I had to read a lot, and I had to talk to them as well. But a lot of the job, at least a lot of the job that required significant brain activity was consultative. And that's kind of what I'm still doing. I will say though, that where I allocate my energies is different. I have to prioritize my energies to the most important things that I can help with now, as opposed to when I was a lawyer, you allocate your energies to everything because it all has to get done. So that's the big difference. Now, that being said, we one of our companies is in the process of being acquired, a company from the August portfolio. And yeah, I certainly am reading more of the documentation than probably the other board members are,
Right.
and maybe driving the outside counsel crazy as a result.
Well, let me ask you, what would you say? I mean, it sounds like you obviously knew a lot about being a venture capitalist, not just from the legal practice, but since you have invested in companies and even founded a couple. What would you say the biggest surprise, or that you didn't? Is there anything about this job, that really is surprising to you that you didn't expect?
Yeah, there are a handful of things. I mean, I have, as a lawyer, I dealt with institutional investors all the time. But when we went out to raise lobby capital, I was the one actually pitching, not to raise company for an operating company, but to raise money as an investor. The conversations were different than I realized. And what I mean by that is the institutional investor base moves much more slowly, and much less predictably than the investment community that invests in operating companies, the venture capitalists and the private equity investors. And that surprised me. We would have conversations. We'd have a meeting with a new LP that we hadn't worked with in the past, that hadn't invested in the prior August funds, and we'd think that the meeting went, there wasn't a lot of engagement on the call, on the Zoom. And then we wouldn't hear from them for a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden we'd get a note saying, please send us the paperwork. It was just hard to understand, hard to predict where they'd come out. And that kind of call, by the way, was joyful, but still unpredictable. So that was one thing that has been very different. I think that I think that the lens that I look at investments, the lens that I'm using to sort of screen my investments, is a little different, and it has refined dramatically over the last 12 or 18 months. And what I mean by that is, when I was doing my angel investing, and when I had my small fund, it was the approach I took was, if I liked the founder and if I understood the market, I would make the bet, and the bet was a passive bet, meaning, I'd put a small amount of money into a bigger round. I would not take a board seat. I would not even attend board meetings. I was sort of a passive investor, akin to, sort of my mentor, the way Ron Conway has always done it. I wasn't not involved, but I wasn't formally involved. And I would place a number of bets. I wasn't doing 1 or 2 a year. I was doing 12 or 15 or 18 a year. So I was building sort of a wide portfolio. As in this job, though, it's different. I'm taking a much deeper look, and I'm only placing, again, a couple bets a year. And when I take that bet, our fund, our mission is we take meaningful ownership, and we take an active role on the board in every company. So that has required a much deeper level of scrutiny. Now, I would say also, as a lawyer, when you're investing, clients tend, and startups that are talking to lawyers, even if they're not their own lawyer, tend to be very open and very transparent. I think there's just an assumption that when you talk to a lawyer, you're telling them everything. It's not always the same with VCs. I see that some of the entrepreneurs have their guards up when they're talking to us. They're in sell mode, and they should be. So it takes a little bit more energy to get to peel the onion back a little bit and look under the different layers. And that was a surprise. Didn't take me long to figure it out, but it certainly was not something I was anticipating at the onset. I guess the last thing is the incredible joy you feel when you see these companies hire some new people, or they accomplish their first sale, or they do a release on the product that's sort of mind-bogglingly great. I always enjoyed the victories of my clients, but man, oh man, is it fun to see how much joy these milestones create for the team that I've backed, and I've been very surprised and incredibly happy about sort of that level of significance.
Let me go back to something you alluded to earlier. That's a question that I've always thought about too. As a lawyer, obviously I've been a lawyer myself, your priorities are kind of pretty clear. It's billable work and then everything else, that's just the reality. So in a way, your prioritization is very simple. It's billable, you do it first and then everything else. Yes. Now, in your case, there's a million things you could be doing that could all be very valuable. It could be talking to entrepreneurs. It could be researching the market. It could be just doing your own reading. It could be, meeting with more entrepreneurs. I mean, there are so many things you could do as a venture capitalist that could all be potentially very valuable. How do you prioritize to do every day?
I think you have to be incredibly disciplined. I mean, I look at, David Hornick, my partner, and Eric Carlberg, my other partner, both have been wildly successful as venture capitalists. And I look at their how they manage their calendars and how they prioritize, and they are both just incredibly disciplined. And I think, my wife teases me. I think I'm also. I think I have the comparable level of discipline, and so, I will literally spend 20-30 minutes every evening before I go to bed, and I'll map out not just the next day but sort of the week ahead, and it changes. The reason why I do it every night is because it changes. For example, there's a company I met last week that I'm really interested in, so I'm now digging in, and I have to move kind of quickly. And there's a myriad of things I need to learn and I need to do in order to make sure I have conviction around this deal, including reference checks, which just takes a lot of time. For sure. And to me is very, very important. And so scheduling the reference checks that the company has provided, and then looking through my network to see additional references that I can sort of hit up, and then scheduling them, that in and of itself is a huge activity. But on top of that, there's a whole bunch of market research I have to do. And I need time for that. I need to allocate a couple hours in the morning to do that. And then there's things like this, meeting with great people and having conversations, and then new companies that are coming in. So it's all about really managing the calendar very diligently. And I'll tell you, when I first started this job, one of my former colleagues was like, don't be one of those VCs that doesn't take meetings or just screens from a quick executive summary. I hope you're one of those VCs that meets everybody. And I didn't give him a positive or a negative, but now that I'm in the job, there's no way I could meet everybody. The volume of opportunities that come over the transom is just so high, and you have to screen quickly, because the time that you need to meet the companies that you're really excited about, or the time you need to process the diligence that you're doing on a company that you're really interested in, or the time that you need to support your existing portfolio, it's all really scarce. So that, I think it does require a lot of discipline. And for those that are not structured people, I think this would be a very challenging job. But for those that like structure and like to impose upon themselves structure, I think you could be very, very successful.
You touched upon another point that I think is actually very important that a lot of, I think, lawyers don't realize is, lawyers are used to very quick feedback in generally. It could be hours, but certainly not more than usually days. And I think lawyers in general feed on that feedback, that keeps them going. So they know that they're doing a job. And then you talk about, gosh, you're not going to know for years. I mean, it's like evolution compared to a lawyer's time feedback. How do you kind of mentally be okay with that? Because I can see that being very hard and challenging. Just you're used to exactly the client saying, "Hey, great job, buddy. Really appreciate you jumping on this," and telling you that on a very regular
or not great job, or hey, you screwed this up. Learn from that.
Yeah, at least you learn. Right.
I will say, first of all, I'm very fortunate that I have the partnership that I have. I mean, David and Eric and I, we communicate all the time. We give each other accolades. There was a deal that, again, there was a company that I was looking at that I got excited about. I had them present at the partner meeting. A bunch of really interesting questions came up. I spent another week or two kind of drilling into it. And ultimately I made the decision that it wasn't something we were going to be able to move forward on. And we were, and then at the following meeting, one of our venture partners asked, what happened to such and such. And I said, I've decided not to move forward on the deal. And, the comment from, I think Eric, was good process. Like, that was a great process. And so we give each other these little victories along the way. Hey, that went well, or, hey, I would have appreciated if, or, and so that helps. And then I think you just sort of, I think you just take a walk around the block when you're frustrated, right? I think you just sort of say, hey, because you really, maybe it's these little victories that I'm seeing with the companies that I'm working with that help. Because I am an adrenaline junkie. I admit it. As a lawyer, I think you're trained to be.
Well, for sure.
And so, hearing some good news helps.
Right.
And you start, the other thing is, as an investor, and this isn't new to me at Lobby, because I saw myself experiencing this as an investor back before I joined Lobby, but you, as an investor, you make a whole bunch of hypotheses about what you're doing. So the macro hypotheses is this company is going to become a big company, right? A big successful company. But there's a lot of little hypotheses. They're going to be able to develop this on time. This is going to scratch the itch of the target customer. They're going to be able to recruit in the right talent at the right moment. You make a whole bunch of sort of, projections, so to speak. And when those events actually happen in a manner consistent with how you projected, it feels great. And those are the little victories that kind of supplant the feedback loop that I was getting as a lawyer, at least in my mind.
Well, the other thing too that strikes me about being a venture capitalist, and this is really like any hedge fund person also, is that it also takes a lot of emotional fortitude, right? Because you're constantly in between the pressure of non-investing in it, making a bad investment, and then not using money in a good investment, right? I mean, it's this constant thing, right? So if you don't pass, you're like, well, but then you're pressure. I mean, obviously you're being hired to invest in companies, but then if you make a bad investment, that's bad for your LPs. So that takes a lot of emotional fortitude. Again, something lawyers don't have to deal with at all. You're just getting paid for your services.
Right. You are not. Yeah. I will tell you, one of the things that is remarkable, it is the job. We see a ton of deals, and by the way, I always want to see more, but we get a lot of good deal flow. But there are moments when you've seen a bunch of stuff and none of it is piquing your interest, right? And it sucks when you have that week where you're not digging into something that you're excited about. Even though you're seeing a lot of deals, if you're not finding one that really captures you, that week sucks. And so that's the emotional roller coaster, which is, I'm seeing all these deals and nothing's catching my attention. What's wrong with me? What am I doing wrong? The other thing is, and I think this is where being trained as a lawyer has actually been enormously helpful for me, and I suspect for David as well. And Eric was a public company CFO, and so this applies to him as well, which is communicating really honestly and really proactively. It has, by doing, look, we're going to make bad decisions. We're going to make some bad bets. That's venture capital.
Yeah.
Telling our LPs, being transparent with them is absolutely mandatory. Letting them know what's working and what's not working reduces the anxiety that big time. And it's the right thing to do, by the way, also, but it really, so we have this philosophy that we're going to be very transparent with each other and with our limited partners about what's going well, what's not going well. And that, doesn't mean it's easier, but it does reduce the anxiety, and does avoid the surprises that can create a lot of hostility and a lot of frustration.
The other comment I'll make too that I think is interesting, and a lot, of course, people always talk about, lawyers always talk about how the curse of their life is the billable hours, but in another way, the billable hour can also be a very warm blanket.
Oh yeah.
Because if you're billing hours, then you're being productive, you're making money, the law firm is happy, it's a very easy warm blanket. Now in your job, okay, you don't have billable hours, so how do you know you're doing a good job? Are you doing anything? How does anyone know? Like who's, so again, it's funny how, I know lawyers always talk about giving those billable hours, but it can be a very secure, a sense of security too for a lawyer.
Absolutely. Right. As a lawyer, you finish that day and you mark down 10 and a half hours.
Yeah.
You feel good about yourself.
Yeah. Totally.
Especially if you know the clients are going to pay for that. when there's questions about their ability to pay, it's maybe not so good. But look, some of the most highly regarded venture capitalists have had one or two or three really big successes, right? And over a 10-year period, so to speak. And so there's not a lot there to kind of feast on when you're insecure.
Well, I know, Peter Lynch who's a great investor. He had a great saying. He said the thing that distinguishes, and he was talking about hedge funds, although I think it's pretty applicable. He said, it's not that most hedge fund guys have the intelligence. They don't have the stomach for it. It just takes so much emotional fortitude to weather all these things, the patience, all these things you talk about. You want instant gratification, you should not be an investor. As you said, you're going to make bad bets, and things are super long cycles, and it takes time. So
I listened to the Motley Fool podcast, the daily podcast. I forgot what they call it now, but it's wonderful if nobody has listened to it. And they were talking about, I guess Warren Buffett had his birthday a week or two ago. They were commenting, or they were interviewing an author who had written a book about Warren Buffett and Warren Buffett's investment style. And he said, what's so amazing about Warren Buffett isn't that he's a great investor. It's that he's been a great investor for 80 years. He started investing when he was 11 years old, and so there's something about the stomach for it, and there's something about the endurance, and through thick and through thin. So we're going through arguably one of the hardest sort of transitional markets that we've experienced at least in my professional career. It's to me reminiscent of 2001, 2002.
Sure, of course.
Because it does not look like this is going to reverberate back quickly like it did in 08. And that's going to have an implication on all investors, including venture capitalists. We're already seeing it in the valuation and in the pace at which deals are getting done. And I think this is going to be the time when, that iron stomach really is going to be tested. Totally. Can you weather this storm? Can you, support your existing investments to help them get through the storm? Can you find the new investments that are going to emerge as the next Googles and Facebooks and Airbnbs during this window? And that, that's really where the rubber is going to hit the road.
Totally. So, Buddy, let me ask you, because I'm sure you know the answer to this already, but having said all that, and, we've talked about the differences and the challenges, as I said, I don't think it's an easy job at all. What do you think in your heart? Like, is this for you? Like, is being a venture capitalist more for Buddy than being a lawyer or doing something else? You must know in your heart, like, this is for me or not. Because if it weren't, you'd probably be going back, right? You would already, by now. It's not like you don't need,
Yeah, no, I loved being a lawyer. I accomplished everything I wanted as a lawyer and a lot more. I am very, very happy with what I'm doing right now. And I can see doing this at least another, decade, 10, 15 years. Again, I get back to sort of my core impetus, which was making sure that I don't stop learning and growing. I feel like I am learning and growing at an extraordinary rate right now. And as long as that continues, I can't imagine doing anything else. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. It feels very comfortable. And I will also say, I watched this. I had a lot of role models to emulate or to learn from. And I learned a lot watching other venture capitalists over the last 20, 30 years. There's things that I am going to do that's similar to what I saw some of those folks do. And there's some things that I'm going to do absolutely differently. I think that the day of the arrogant venture capitalist that, whose voice is the loudest and is whose will is the most insistent that's not the role I'm playing. I don't even think that makes sense anymore, but it's certainly not the way I'm going to approach it. It's not my personality. I wouldn't find that enjoyable. And frankly, I don't think it's effective. So I have some learning to do. But in terms of how it feels very right. It feels very consistent with, my goals and my personality. And I'm just loving it.
Well, buddy, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your taking the time. I would love to just check in with you in a few years and hear how it's going and hear about some of those success stories. But it's been great chatting with you.
I always enjoy talking to you, Richard. You're fantastic. This podcast is wonderful. And so thanks for having me as a guest. And I'm absolutely eager to meet hopefully sooner than a few years, but at least a few years to sort of reconcile my premonitions with reality.
Very good. This is Richard Hsu and Buddy Arnheim. Thanks.